Good evening and welcome to the Livonia Public Schools regular board meeting of September 23rd, 2024. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Bonifield? Here. Mrs. Burton? Here. Mrs. Frank?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mrs. Acosta here. President Bradford?
Here, we have a quorum. Good evening. If you'd like to follow along with tonight's meeting and you are joining us in person, you can go to the doors to the left and find a copy of tonight's agenda. Oh, first we're going to do the pledge. Tammy, Mrs. Bonifield, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I would love to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Now we can get moving here. All right. If you are joining us from home this evening, you can go to our LPS website at www.livoniapublicschools.org, click on the school board tab, go down to the board meeting information, and you will find our meeting agenda for this evening. Click on today's date, and then you can go ahead and look at that agenda. Tonight's a regular meeting or a voting meeting. If you've tuned in to watch this meeting, you may notice that there's not a lot of discussion happening on those items. That's because we've seen and discussed these items multiple times prior to the meeting, mainly at our study sessions and at our committee of the whole meetings. If you do wish to hear more regarding these items, we ask you to go back and watch the committee of the whole meeting. There you will find a much richer discussion and many questions. Our committee of the whole meetings are recorded and they can be found on our website and via YouTube. All right. And with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to item 3, communications. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien, item 3A, LPS Points of Pride presentation. Good evening, Mrs. O'Brien.
Good evening, President Bradford. I am very excited to do a quick overview of all of the wonderful summer programming opportunities that we offered our students. I have some great pictures of kids, but I also want to just go over some of the great programming that we offered to our students from kindergarten through 8th grade. We had 3 different camp opportunities for our students 2nd through 8th. Innovation Camp, which was Camp 1, Building Camp, Camp 2, Camp 3 was Flight Camp. Those were open to any student. 2nd grade to 8th grade. Our ESY camp at Webster was in the middle there, overlapping with Camp 2 and Camp 3. We also offered a camp at Nijiro for Nijiro students at the end of July. And then we offered our very popular kindergarten and 1st grade camp at each one of our schools. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of what that looked like, but beginning with how many students attended. We've talked about this before. We've moved our dates a little bit to find what would be the best time of year to offer summer programming. And as you can see, that camp right after the 4th of July to mid-July was our best attended camp, 182 students. Plus we had 55 additional special education students at that camp. That was, as Mrs. Sproul could say, it was a great camp. So that worked out very well. And then very close to that, the Camp 3 in the end of July to just the beginning of August, we had 190 students. And then, like I said, that very popular kindergarten through 1st grade camp where each school offered their entering kindergarten and their exiting kindergarten a chance to come to school and to hear stories and learn some routines and play on the playground and just get acclimated to kindergarten and 1st grade. And then the last thing I'll talk about is our Community Fridays, which we've been offering for the last several years. Where we invite our families to participate in different ways to engage with the community, but also a learning opportunity. So 730 students attended that. So Camp 1, that was held in the Stevenson Triad. Each one of our camps, we try to offer each of the 3 camps, one in each triad, and we offer free transportation to that triad. But parents are welcome to sign up for any and all of the camps. This year we tried to limit, we had 2 classrooms per grade level at each camp. We didn't even get all of that when you got to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, but if they lived in that triad, they got free transportation if they were interested in it. This camp was 1 week after we got out of school this year. So we got out early June, we had 1 week. Classroom teachers, typically some are still closing down their classrooms, and then that next Monday, we had camp. So this camp had all of our camps had breakfast and a greeting and social emotional learning time. They did math. They had literacy and a STEM integrated block. They had PE. So our specials that we offer is based on the teachers that sign up to teach summer school or teach at a camp. So it may be an art teacher at one camp, a PE teacher at another camp. So it just depended. And then they got a snack in the late morning before they went home. These were half-day camps for about 3 to 3.5 hours, depending on their bus schedule. So Camp 1 was an innovator camp. So students, we had activities around making things and being an innovator, and we followed the habits of innovation. And so here are some students who are investigating and building things. We utilize some of the robots that we have purchased for our idea factories, and so students had lots of opportunities to think, to read, to write, and to solve problems. Our second camp, so that was the one that was right after the 4th of July, and that was in the Churchill Triad. And so this one had very similar schedule of the day, but we also had our multi-age students who were also a part of this camp. This was held at Frost Middle School. And so we had PE and we had coding with the robots. So we had additional people who were used to using the robots that we purchased from previous camps. So we actually had a special, they got to have PE and robots during this camp. So it just depends on the staff that we had. And so how can we use our knowledge of structural design to build other structures that can withstand a force? And what does it take to be a builder? So here's some great pictures of our kids doing that. So our multi-age camp, this was the first time we specifically and targeted our students who are in our multi-age classrooms to be a part of our camp and made sure that we provided them the access to the same opportunities, but with the right support for them. So they had a social emotional learning focus. They had literacy and fun activities, so they had the same curriculum and they adjusted it based on their students' needs. And then we also built peer connections at this camp, which was just a fabulous thing. And our last camp for 2nd through 8th grade was our flight camp. So that was at the very end of July all the way to August 1st. And this was held at Emerson Middle School. Again, we used the habits of innovation. So we talked about students being innovators, but they learned how to make things fly and read and wrote about flying. And we had a parent who's a pilot who came in and talked to students. I actually texted the principal who oversaw that camp for this gentleman's name, and I didn't get it. He didn't get it back to me today, but I thought that was pretty fabulous that he did that. So what is flight and aviation, and how does it relate to the other parts of our world? They did paper airplanes, and they tested them for how far they went, how high. We also used some of our PLTW curriculum during this camp, and then this was one of the read-alouds that we read. So during that same end of July, Nijiro held a camp for their students, and they had a very similar schedule of the day. They did reading and writing. They had a social emotional morning meeting time. crafts and activities, and then outside activities. And so one example of what they did is they made old-time Japanese toys and games for their students. At Webster, every year we offer our ESY camp, so that you can see runs about a month, 4 weeks, Mrs. Sproul? 5 weeks. 5 weeks. And so our theme this year was the Olympics, which that was a great year for that theme, giving students the access to a year-round program based on their needs. Their day was, again, very similar, had some small group meeting time, group learning, sensory and movement, read-alouds, and a closing meeting. So they were a half a day also. Our kindergarten, first grade camps, I think this is our most popular camp since we started that. So just an opportunity for kindergarten and first grade students to just have time to play and collaborate and talk about learning. These mornings, they tend to be 2 to 2.5 hours. We do not provide transportation for our K-1 camps. Each one of our schools offered one this summer, except for Hayes didn't have high attendance and they weren't quite ready. So they are renovations. So we offered those parents to go to Grant, which isn't very far away. So again, help learners feel comfortable with school, relearn or learn routines, and have fun social experiences with peers. And our famous Community Fridays, so this year we did 4 of them instead of 7. So we did less of them, but with a more academic focus overall. So we invited Wildlife Safari in, and that was held at Churchill High School, and they viewed and touched various animals and learned interesting facts. And so they were able to go up on stage and touch snakes and all kinds of lovely creatures. So 185 students registered and 184 attended. Yep. Our second one was at Greenmead, so right here in Livonia, our own community learning. So we took a tour of our hometown historical jewel, as quoted here, and the tour guides led families through the different buildings and talked about the history of our hometown. And then they got to go into some of the buildings, and there were docents inside the buildings who did some teaching on those different sites. So that one was not as strongly attended, 56 parents and 75 students, but still a great opportunity for our families who maybe hadn't taken the opportunity to go there. Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum was our third Community Friday. So Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum brings you stations that you have volunteers work through different activities, math, science, innovation, and we provide the volunteers, and then students have the ability to go to each one of those stations. So again, we had 157 students and 99 adults. And our last one was the Scholastic Book Fair. So as you know, all of our students got 5 books at the end of the school year, but this had been such a popular part of our Community Fridays to have characters read with our students, and students get to take home a book. So it was one that we were asked to continue to do, and so they could listen to stories with superheroes, princesses, and we had 174 students get a free book, 2 free books, and 83 students stayed and listened to a story read by a character. So as you can see, we have some Mario characters. Princess, I'm not sure what her princess. There you go, Princess Peach. So that was our last Community Friday. Superheroes, Jasmine, Batman. So we can't wait to do it all over again in just 10 more months, 8 more months. So just wanted to share all of those great things that we were doing. Any
Thank you.
questions?
Yeah, anybody have any questions? Mrs. Acosta?
I just had a question about, well, first, just impressive, all the engaging learning that happened during the summer. But I had a question about the NIJI camp. Is that just specific for NIJI students or any students interested? I just considered maybe as an opportunity for students that don't know about NIJI to have that chance during the summer.
So it was very interesting this year. So last year they wanted to just run a short, small camp for 1 week and for their students, but a lot of Nijiro students signed up for our other camps. So they were looking for ones for them to kind of continue their Japanese learning. So I put it on our original sign-up sheet, and we had a lot of English-speaking students who don't go to Nijiro who signed up for Nijiro this year. So we weren't really prepared for that, but it is something we would like to do next year, is provide non-Japanese speaking students the opportunity to go to camp for a week at Nijiro and learn a little bit about the culture and the language. So yes, we're hopeful to just grow that just a little bit and give different students that opportunity.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Mrs. Burton?
I'm thrilled that we're still able to offer something like this to bridge that academic gap over the summertime. And I was thinking as you were speaking, it's really hard to measure this because we don't really have a way to measure what these kids would have learned and the learning loss that may have happened versus the fact that it didn't happen. But I love that there's an academic theme to the whole thing in addition to putting a whole lot of fun into it.
Absolutely.
I love the math and the reading consistently throughout most, if not all, of the camps. So that's fabulous. I'm thrilled. Couple quick questions. The multi-age camp, what age groups were those covering?
Elementary age.
Yeah, that was our kindergarten through our 6th graders were able to attend that camp.
We're normally in a multi-age resource program, one of our center classrooms.
Gotcha. Now that makes more sense. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
And ESY, what does that stand for?
That's
Extended
extended
school
school
year.
year services.
Okay.
So that something is determined by an IEP, so a student must qualify on their IEP in order to attend that camp, which is why it was a smaller number.
Okay, great. That makes sense too. And generally, these were all morning camps, right? 9 to 11:30-ish type
Yep.
time, give or take a little bit?
Yep, 9 to 12, 9 to 11:30.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, great. Again, I'm thrilled that we're able to continue offering these. I think it's a great idea. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mrs. Bonifield?
I was just curious with the Ann Arbor, we had really great turnout. Did we have buses take everybody out there, or all the parents drove out there?
No, so they actually have an outreach program. So they bring the centers to us. You have to
okay.
provide the volunteers, they provide the materials. So 2 people drive a bus or a van. It says Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum. They bring all the activities to you. You usually set up in a cafeteria. They teach people how to run each one of the activities and then go. And parents and students can come to each table and participate.
So
It's wonderful.
I apologize for missing that. Did you say what school that was held at?
It was one of our community Fridays. I think it was Emerson's cafeteria because it looked like it was blue and gold.
But
So
it was for any child in the district.
right.
But it was held in one of our school
Yes,
buildings.
yes.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yes, that was a great question, because I thought they went to Ann Arbor, and I'm thinking, wow, how do they manage that? Those activities, I would think the kids would want to be wandering around the museum a bit. But since they come here, that's even better, you
Yeah.
know, so.
It's wonderful.
Awesome. Now, on the Community Fridays, the parents, do they stay at the location?
Yes, it's a family event on our Fridays, so
Okay.
parents stay with their students. We try to create activities that they're doing together.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. We all look forward to next summer to find out what's going to be happening. So
Me
thanks
too.
for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we're going to move on to item 3B, the summer 2024 bond work presentation. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Jenkins. Good evening, Mrs. Jenkins.
Good evening, President Bradford, members of the board, Superintendent Oquist. This has become a September tradition for me. It won't be as much of an update for all the board members and staff here at tonight in attendance tonight, but it's more meant for an update for the community. So it's the start of a brand new school year, and with that, it's my pleasure to recap the bond projects that have taken place in our district during the summer months. Thank you, Emily. Now am I clicking through? Yeah, I don't know if it's. Okay, I'll do it. Yeah, just do it from there. Okay, Mrs. O'Brien's going to click through the slides for me. Rounding up the photos and sharing these excellent improvements that are made possible by the 2021 bond issue has become somewhat of a September thing for us here at our board meetings in September. Not only is it so exciting to welcome our students, staff, and families back to LPS in September or in August, it's also super exciting to be able to offer beautifully updated spaces for our students and staff to experience. We are fortunate to have made our way through 3 phases now of the current bond issue, which have brought the following improvements to our schools, and those are listed up there. I'll just kind of go through them quickly. I know that print is somewhat small. We finished up the air conditioning in all buildings last summer, classroom furniture and equipment replacements, technology upgrades, media center renovations, school security enhancements, STEM curriculum expansion, CTE program expansion, athletic facility and playground updates, collaboration spaces, kitchen renovations, robotics program expansion, and of course the new early childhood center. So a lot has been happening with that 2021 bond. This past summer brought the following improvements to the following schools: Hayes Elementary, Hoover Elementary, Holmes Middle School, Roosevelt Elementary, and Stevenson High School. And at those schools over the summer, we renovated the kitchens and the library media centers. Also added flex classrooms in those media centers and idea factories. And a few restroom renovations were sprinkled in there as well. And of course, the completion of the Early Childhood Center was the showpiece of the summer bond work, and that actually began all of the utility work and the foundation and structural beams and whatnot took place earlier than last summer at the ECC, but it was really crunch time, and it was go time at the site all summer long. So for the benefit of the community, we'll walk through each project with this somewhat brief slideshow. It's not super long. We'll begin at Hayes Elementary, where the Library and Media Center has been renovated into a beautiful space with bright colors, and I love those paw prints on the carpet there. Amazing furniture, and of course, lots of resources for students. In addition, the addition of a creative learning lab we call the Idea Factory offers students the opportunity to engage in the newly expanded science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM, curriculum called Project Lead the Way. There's a picture of the exterior of the Idea Factory. Rounding out the renovations at Hayes, the kitchen has been remodeled and equipment has been upgraded for higher functionality. As a side note, the kitchens were all original to the buildings, so they were really in need of these awesome upgrades. Moving on to Hoover Elementary, we see the beautiful new colors, bright atmosphere, and the furniture that is both fun and functional for students. I just love that configuration of the little stools that looks like a flower in the middle there. And the Idea Factory at Hoover, there's 2 more photos of just the interior of the LMC. And the Idea Factory at Hoover was upgraded from a standard classroom into a learning space that is conducive to creativity and project-based learning. Each LMC also has at least one flexible classroom. I think we had that, there we go, on the right there, with the folding glass doors. And lastly, there was a picture of the renovated kitchen at Hoover with all new equipment and a more functional space. Next up, we have Roosevelt Elementary, where the LMC is just incredible. Isn't that eye-popping? The colors are fantastic. Let's see, we can click through those, pointing out the Flex Classroom on the left there, another general shot inside the LMC, the Idea Factory on the left, and a shiny new kitchen on the right. And next we have the all-new Holmes Middle School LMC, and wow, what a difference. Notice the functional furniture, new color scheme, flexible classroom spaces, and an Idea Factory. When I visited, and we'll click through some of those spaces there. I think one more, and there's a smaller collaboration space on the left. And when I visited Holmes and told the kitchen crew what I was up to, taking pictures of the renovated kitchen, they said, "Oh, did you see our new ovens? Did you see all this new equipment?" They were super excited about it. So I was happy to see that. Next, we have Stevenson High School with the all-new LMC. It rivals any college campus, if you ask me. It's similar to the new LMC at Franklin High School. And this space has multiple flex classrooms and furniture that encourages student collaboration. The Stevenson Kitchen, there's a couple more shots of the Stevenson Kitchen is still under construction, but I hear it is very close to being completed. This photo on the left was taken a few weeks back, so it's not looking that bare at this moment. I also wanted to point out a space that's new at Stevenson off the South Cafeteria. Oh, you can go back. Yep. Nope. Yep. The photo on the right is a new gathering space off the South Cafeteria where kids can eat lunch and hang out. So I thought that was really cool. And finally, the major accomplishment of all accomplishments for the summer of 2024, the opening of the new Livonia Early Childhood Center. While site work, utilities, foundation, and framing began prior to the summer, the ECC was buzzing with construction activity right up until the opening of school on August 26th. So this kind of takes you through some of those early days when we could see the sky through the ceiling before the skylights were installed, and just a great space. This beautiful new school is home to our preschool programs, specialized programs for preschoolers, as well as our daycare program. We can scroll through the photos. These are from the open house, and these photos here are just from an average day in one of the, I think that was a child care room. So we're very proud of this project, and just as we are of all of the bond projects that have occurred since the passage of the first bond in 2013, and again with the current bond from 2021. We want to say thank you to our community for investing in our district to make our schools the best that they can be for our students, staff, and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Except it's so beautiful, and yes, we cannot thank our voters enough for entrusting us with the bond dollars so that we could update and make all these wonderful spaces for our kids. So it's awesome.
It really is. I came to work, started with LPS in the fall of 2012, so I've been able to see every bit of the renovations from the 2013 bond all the way through, and I'm also an LPS grad, so it's really, really amazing. It's like night and day.
It really is.
Very
and
proud.
It's so exciting and very, yes, lots of pride for seeing how wonderful these buildings look.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item 3C, our district update from the superintendent, Mrs. O'Quist.
Thank you so much, President Bradford. I appreciate that. It's always fantastic to be able to have this time to share so many highlights and a district update from across the district. And I just want to, before we go in, and there's a ton of good stuff to share, as always, especially at this time of year, but I do want to acknowledge a significant challenge that we are facing with regard to the bus driver shortage. So if I could just take a few minutes and talk about that at the start.
Yes.
I feel I would be remiss in just jumping into all of the highlights without impacting how much this has been a challenge for our families. So as you know, this week we have had to cancel routes impacting approximately 13 to 14% of our riders. And we do know how truly impactful and inconvenient this has been for our families, and we apologize for having to make these cancellations. We know that our ability to bring our children to school, our emphasis on them being in school each and every day is a priority that we share with our families. And certainly interrupting bus service, whether it's for a day or for a few days or even a couple of weeks, is absolutely a last option we would want to take. As our board knows, and we want our community to be as aware as well, school districts across the state, across our region, indeed the country, are really facing a critical shortage of bus drivers. This is an area where sometimes there are areas in education staffing that are pretty cyclical. As educators retire, even though we do have a teacher shortage, we generally have teachers as teachers retire, new teachers coming up through the ranks and applying for those positions. We are seeing a huge shrinkage in the areas of skilled trades, so like our electricians, plumbers, our maintenance staff, and we're also seeing that in transportation. We have really seen truly Herculean efforts from our supervisor of transportation, Vicki Simonik, members of our transportation office staff, our dispatchers, and the drivers themselves to really be able to cover the number of routes we cover. So I want to give a little bit of statistics regarding that. We run about 55 to 60 routes every morning and every afternoon. And now remember, many of those routes, when we say a route, that may be a 4-tier route. So there may be a driver doing a high school route, a middle school route, an upper elementary route, and a lower L route. So if we say Route O, for instance, that's not simply one route. Those are multiple routes. Many of our drivers run usually 2 to 3 tiers. Some do 4, and some do less, depending on how far their route takes them. In addition, we have 57 midday runs that are done to our special education job sites that we run out of Garfield and LTP, LCTCs, taking our students to and from our high schools, and then our culinary program. So we run that across 23 schools and 36 square miles. And we also transport students out of the district for special education and also receive students in the district for many of our programs. And we are proud to be able to do that for just over 6,800 students every day. So we know when there's anything that impacts this, even if it's impacting one route, we're impacting multiple students and multiple families. So thankfully, this has not had to happen very often. In fact, it happened 2 years ago, just post-pandemic, and we have been able to, again, piece together with the expertise of our transportation staff many of our routes. So for instance, if a driver calls off and perhaps that was the last one that we had, maybe one additional, it may be that we're piecing together routes to cover that particular driver's coverage for that day. The next day, it could very well be an entirely different set of schools, different set of neighborhoods. So it is rarely the same fix for that challenge from day to day. One thing we have really avoided doing, and we were concerned that we may be close over the past couple of weeks, was having to do an early morning cancellation, which is why we sent out the notice we did at the end of last week that we would be canceling routes for 5 routes, A through E, last Friday and this week, and then next week we have another set, I believe, running F through the next 5 routes. And we're right now in the process of bringing 4 new drivers on board. They are going through their training. We never want to rush that process. So as much as we'd love them ready to go the next day, we want a complete and thorough training process to take place. We are confident when that is done and they have passed those assessments that we are ready to move on to full-time driving. We do cover all of the costs of training. We do pay those applicants while they are training. And then we start them when we believe that they are ready to safely transport our students. So as much as we'd like to move through that process quickly, we will never compromise on making sure that folks are ready to roll, so to speak. But I did want to just take a moment to share a few steps that have been taken in the district, if you don't mind, President Bradford. I just think it's important that we continue to communicate this, and any ways or ideas that people have, we are always open to hearing them. So in addition to our own cadre of full-time drivers who are employed by LPS, we do employ all of our own drivers. We do not outsource. We are actually very, very proud of that. We do have 6 daily substitute drivers that we employ through a third-party transportation provider. Due to their own shortages, they've generally been providing us 5 a day. Certainly, if we could get more as substitute drivers, we would. Unfortunately, we have not been able to get more, and our transportation supervisor has contacted several other providers seeking to hire additional substitute drivers. None of those have been able to supply due to the region-wide shortage of drivers. One of the things that we have done, which we know has its own impact on workload, but we call on current employees who were previously bus drivers, who still keep current their CDL, who maybe work now in maintenance or the warehouse, or even in the transportation office, including our transportation supervisor. And they drive right now just about every single day. And we are very fortunate to have as many staff members as we do have CDLs, but as you can imagine, that compounds, right? When we take folks for 2, 3, 4 hours a day away from their normal job, where they have a full workload, we know that that is impacted, and we appreciate the flexibility of every department that has allowed us to utilize the staff, and we are extraordinarily grateful that they have answered the call when we have called upon them to do that. I already talked about that regular routes are routinely combined in order to transport the same number of students, but using fewer buses and drivers. We do that wherever we can, but again, that goes back to the same problem doesn't always have the same solution. Our wages for bus drivers are very competitive with other public school districts who directly hire and employ their bus drivers. We monitor that very, very closely. Sometimes we'll hear that a particular company is paying this much per hour for a driver. And we need to remember that when we're comparing against private transportation companies that are not paying into the state retirement system and that are not providing things like holidays, sick and bereavement days, vacation days, et cetera, they may have a different hourly rate. But so we have decided that one of the things we wanted to make sure our applicants knew were what those additional benefits are for working for a school district directly, and that things like qualifying for a traditional pension, having access to high-quality health care plans, long-term disability, paid holidays, paid Act of God days. And so our communications department has created specific flyers highlighting those benefits. We have been using those for quite some time now. And we also, and I believe that came out of one of Mr. Francis's transportation leadership meetings, they also suggested we put that information right on the posting so that folks don't have to look for that information. So now that information is built right into, and that's been the case for quite some time now. We advertise widely, anything from something as basic as banners at all of our schools, social media. We've been at job fairs that are sponsored by outside organizations. We've also hosted multiple in-house job fairs where we actually do that right here at central office. We allow folks the chance to get behind the wheel and try just a very simple loop to see what it feels like to drive a bus. We've also made contact with local law enforcement to see if they would be interested in being employed on off days for those that had their CDL. We, of course, hire year-round. And as I said, we currently have 4 drivers in training, and we are actively responding to calls and applications literally as soon as they're completed. So I really just wanted to make sure that we were hopefully clearly communicating that we know what an impact this has been, what an inconvenience this has been, not only for our students and our families, but also for our staff and our leaders at our schools that are seeing, at those schools that are impacted, an increased amount of arrival and dismissal traffic, and of course, our transportation department. So I'll open it up if the board has any questions on that.
Sure. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Acosta?
So, just for the sake of setting expectations.
Yes.
With the 4 bus drivers that are in training, once they are eligible to drive, what will our situation look like?
So I'm going to ask Mr. Francis to weigh in on that and to see where that he thinks that will put us.
I don't want to, just the caveat up front is, I'm not going to say anything definitive, because every single day we wake up, we're wondering how that day will play out. And that's not hyperbole. I mean, literally, I get up before 5 in the morning, and I'll get those calls, and it'll be, we're in this position, we're in this situation, we think we can make it, but if anybody calls in from now, we're going to be in trouble. And then I sit around for a while doing this. And so if we had 4 more that were all able to, pass the tests, both physical test as well as the driving test and going through the training, that would greatly boost what our capabilities are. I would say that would put us like right back at that razor's edge of each day saying, is somebody going to call in sick today, and will we be down? Usually if we're down 1 person, we've been handling that, as Mrs. Oquist has been talking about, through a variety of tearing apart routes and then putting them back together in a manner that other buses in the same triad can come by and pick up students. Of course, that's why oftentimes that causes, almost without question, a delayed bus route, both getting the children to school and also, if we have to do that in the afternoon, getting them home in the afternoon, because we have those stacked drivers like in those routes that Mrs. Oquist explained. Someone might drive at Franklin and then drive for Emerson and then drive with the Cooper students and then one of the K4s in that triad. So that's a 4-tier system that she had spoken about before. 4 would be amazing, and we continue to call around to local companies. They've got their own shortages. Mrs. Oquist already mentioned that, so I'm not going to belabor that point. But we would be on that edge, and I believe we've had a couple of applicants recently as well. So we need to vet those, interview them, see where we're at, and then we generally call it a 4 to 6 week process. We don't rush people. I've seen other people say, hey, that's 3 to 5, whatever the case may be. We do the training. They also have to do a special training with the county RESA, and they have to take, obviously, driving tests. They have to take physicals that are passed via the Department of Transportation. So all of those things have to occur. It can feel like a very long process, but it's the way that it should be done. But that's sort of where we're at. And again, I don't want to say, boy, in 3 more weeks, we're going to be 100% with extra drivers, but we're going to work every single day to continue to try to gain more employees of our own. And if we can, rob Peter to pay Paul for a little bit in the interim, trying to get other subs from other companies, we will certainly work on that.
Yeah, there's no doubt that we are actively problem solving. This is not, unfortunately, it is not new, but it is also something that is aggressively on our agenda and on that of our leadership team. And again, we're not only looking at these 4. As Mr. Francis said, we do have some other applicants, and we will move through that process as quickly as possible. But I just wanted to make sure that I had a chance to talk about that. I love sharing a district update, and normally those are all, again, very positive highlights. But this is something unusual for us. Unfortunately, it is happening in a number of different districts, and we are hoping to get through our period of time and make that as short as possible. But I did want to make sure we spent a few minutes on that tonight.
Thank you. Mrs. Burton.
Thank you. Mrs. Oquist, you touched on it there for just a second.
Yeah.
I was asked as recently as today why just Livonia is having this problem. And nobody else seems to be having this problem. Can you address that as far as other surrounding districts?
Sure. Well, I wish no one was having this problem, right? But unfortunately, that's not the case. I was just recently at our state superintendent conference, and this is definitely not a Livonia-only problem. We are seeing that in other districts, and sometimes it is the morning of, like a cancellation to make it through that day and canceling of routes. We've chosen this path because although it's disruptive for a week, we're not impacting a different group and different students every single day where parents aren't knowing until that morning and trying to scramble. So we thought if we let families know for a 1 week period of time, if they could make those arrangements, and then for several weeks, not have them impacted. And hopefully by that point in time, we'll be back on cycle. But no, unfortunately, it is not limited to just us. It is happening in many, many districts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Mrs. Frank?
I think one of the reasons it has impacted our community hard is because we don't, I think as Mrs. Oquist said this, we've not been forced to do this very often. And I think other school districts, this is more of a routine and they've had this over the years. And so it's not as surprising when this happens, but our community is not used to this. This is something that doesn't happen in other school districts. It is more of a routine thing that happens throughout the school year. So I think that was one of the reasons our community was impacted by this. But I'm grateful that you addressed it because I think it is on the hearts and minds of a lot of our parents. And so I'm so
Absolutely.
grateful that you addressed it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We wish more than anything that this was an absolute last resort, and as quickly as we can get it solved, we will.
Thank you. We appreciate you addressing that.
Absolutely. Are you ready to hear some good stuff to
Well,
start
the
the
school year has started.
It has
so-
started. Let's go.
Yes, let's go.
All right, so I'll share some highlights. It seems so, the first day seems so long ago. We are already in our 5th week of school. I don't know how that happened. But we have some great photos from the start of school, and I just want to thank Mrs. Jenkins for always making sure that every one of our schools has some of the best photo ops there with all of the welcome back signs that she arranges. Let me give a shout out to the company. KBE signs. We love these, and I will tell you, every school you visit, you see families and kiddos behind there. It's just a great thing to see at all of our schools, great way to welcome back our families. And at our high schools, we start in the morning with only 9th graders, which is a great opportunity for freshmen to just get their feet wet. I'll tell you what, it's intimidating to walk in and to walk in with 1,500 students and you're trying to figure your way around. And so a lot of our seniors come in, they help give tours that first day, and you get to open your locker without 10 people watching you and find the way to your classes. So here are some of our Patriots Relate, our leaders in the school, showing our new Patriots around Franklin. And lots of hugs from old friends and new friends, and you see on the young man on the right getting that locker combination. I bet he doesn't even have to look now. He can just do it by heart. So we'll have Emerson on the left there, our early childhood center. I think we shared some of these pictures with you when we first created those circular windows, those reading nooks areas for the kiddos. We wondered, would we have to have put little stuffed animals in there or books? And I will tell you, the minute they walked in the room, they gravitated, they climbed on there. It's carpeted in that area. They play inside there. It is just fantastic. So lots of great smiles, lots of happy kiddos those first few days. You see Dr. Katie Dodge on the left there. I had a chance to walk through on the first day with her. She has just worked tirelessly to help us get our ECC off the ground and get started. So kudos to her and the whole amazing staff over there. Lots of assemblies to start the year. You probably remember that as your own kids went through that. But a great opportunity to welcome students to the school, to build that sense of community, and also to set some expectations. We always say that we can't expect students to know what we expect of them unless we're clear. And so we always say clear is kind. So being very clear about expectations is a kind thing to do for others. There's a bus. There's a bus you can drop off and pick up. We'd love to see that. And fall sports are underway. If that's not one of the best pictures on the left, I don't know who captured it, but I absolutely love it. The enthusiasm of the volleyball team and the coach. The marching bands are just rocking it out this year. If you have not been to a game, you are missing it because they work so hard all summer, and boy, does it show. So it's been great seeing our bands get things going on Friday Night Lights, and our teams are off to a great start, working so hard. So love fall sports, love fall athletics. We see some success here. We've had our cross-country teams, our boys and girls cross-country teams from Churchill recently won an invitational and had some great games on the fields and performances by our pom and cheer teams. Oh, there they are. Our award-winning Franklin Pom team there, and Stevenson was recently highlighted on the news in a segment during the Lions game a couple of weeks ago. You may have seen them. They showed a great score by one of our great athletes on the Stevenson team, and it was wonderful to see our kiddos highlighted in that way. Just last Friday, Churchill's Hall of Fame inducted 2 new members, Mark McCusker, who if you have been at any athletic event at Churchill, you have met Mark. I will tell you that right now. And Romello Brown was a fantastic football player, I believe a 2014 grad, I'm pretty sure, who also went on to play for Wayne State University. They were both inducted into the Churchill Hall of Fame on Friday evening. So thanks so much to Athletic Director Casey Conway for coordinating that. And you see Mr. Haig on the left and Mr. Filiatro on the right, who were both part of that ceremony as well. Stevenson homecoming floats. Is it not cool to still see? I might be the oldest person here. Did you guys do floats?
Yeah.
We did floats, and when I was okay.
You're not.
When I was a Stevenson Spartan, we made floats that looked very similar, and I'll tell you, I love that they're still making them. So Once Upon a Time was the theme at Stevenson this year, and some great floats to be seen on what was a beautiful night for homecoming this weekend at Stevenson. Lots of great open houses all across the district, well attended by our families, especially at the elementary level. We saw a little lighter attendance actually at our middle school and our high schools this year, and so we just want to thank every parent who took the time to come out and to learn more about what would be happening this year and getting ready to partner on this journey of education for your children. Some more open houses. This was the open house at Hoover. It was also the opening of the Media Center, and I know a number of you were there, and what a wow evening that was. Picture Day is happening. Are those not the cutest kids on the left? I mean, seriously? And I don't know what the black comb does. I always think, like, please don't try to ruin anything. But the kiddos look great, and it's that time of year where Picture Day is happening across the district. Tools for schools, we wrote about it in our first link of the year. So hopefully you're getting and reading the LPS link, which is something Mrs. Jenkins and I prepared to send out to our families and our staff with just some quick hits. But it was awesome to have, remind me which, it was one of our local unions came out, correct?
Oh, yeah, Carpenters.
Our Carpenters Union. So huge, I am right like this, right like that. So thank you to our Carpenters Union for coming out and having some mobile hands-on classroom opportunities for our kids. I think the next couple pictures, you will see that. They had some amazing experiences with that and had a chance to try a number of different low-tech and high-tech tools and see how they're utilized in different careers. And then we have also had some hands-on experiences in animation and web design. our pre-med, and our automotive technology. So as you know, the things happening at our Livonia Career Technical Center are truly second to none. And when you add on these layers of experience from folks who are working these jobs in the real world, there is truly just nothing like it. So some great connections with the community. Speaking of hands-on, we had the good old-fashioned corn roast was once again just well attended in our community. A number of our folks here at this table were there greeting, and a number of you were corn roasters as well. We had our LPS Foundation education well represented, and got to see some of our families and kiddos as well. And Touch a Truck, what an event. It was an absolutely beautiful and warm day. And we are just so proud of our Churchill High School Rotary Interact Club, who partner with the Livonia AM Rotary, another powerhouse group, to put on an event where children have the opportunity to interact with a wide range of large vehicles. And the excitement is truly off the charts. I'm going to share over the next couple of slides in a moment a number of the student volunteers who were there from the Rotary Interact Club and from other clubs as well throughout our district that were helping. In the center there, you see one of our bus drivers, Elizabeth Sarlaskis. She has been there each year. I will tell you, it doesn't look very crowded right now, but when I was there, the line for the bus was down the road. The kids are so excited. They enter through the back there. They poke their heads out. They take pictures. They get to explore the bus, and then they exit through the front. And so I think Mrs. Bonifield had talked to me about possibly having a bus number 2 there. And so we thought we'd have maybe one of our other unique buses there next year, and maybe shorten that line and get more kiddos through. And we had many folks at this table there as well, passing out. I think Mrs. Bradford has one of the Hot Wheels in her hands. There's this sweet little boy kind of walking next to me. He was with his family, and he spied that Hot Wheels were being passed out. He went past me like he had seen Santa Claus. He flew to the Hot Wheels, and I think you guys gave out over 8,000 individual Hot Wheels.
Yeah.
It was so cute how excited he was when he saw that. So huge kudos to the Livonia AM Rotary, our own Tammy Bonifield, president, and you see so many members of not just the Churchill Interact Club, but a ton of community volunteers there as well. The helicopter's a huge hit. The police cars are always a big hit. The race car, just everything under the sun. I think we have one more picture of some of our kiddos and volunteers. They got me on the golf cart with them, and then of course I found the volunteers with the donuts. So it was just a great day all around, and I just want to thank the Livonia AM Rotary for being such an amazing influence on our Churchill Interact Club students. So, and many of them got there at 6 a.m. I'm just going to point that out. So was it just last week? Was the Bentley marker dedication? We had the Bentley High School, the Livonia Historical Society, in combination with some other folks, earned a historical marker, which is only the 7th in the city, for the Bentley High School site, which is now the site of the Kirksey Recreation Center. And so we were very pleased to be part of that event and the unveiling of the marker, and to welcome many, many Bentley alumni. 2 distinguished alums sit at this table, Mrs. Burton and Mr. Johnson, and each of the decades were represented. And I will tell you, they are a proud group of alum, and it was great to hear them sing the fight song at the end. So very, very special event. Proud to be a part of that. Speaking of something proud to be a part of, the community, or the greenhouse has finally been built. How about that, right? That has been a long time coming. So many supporters pitching in to outfit the new greenhouse at Garfield Community School. We especially want to thank Livonia Breaking Barriers for Kids and Families, Alpha USA, and Veronica Cruz, D&B Landscaping, Masco, and Healthy Livonia. Healthy Livonia was a huge financial supporter for this project. And you'll see throughout these pictures not only our amazing students from Garfield Community School, who were a huge part of the work that was being done that day, but also our students from the Advanced Construction Trades class from LCTC, and their teacher, Mr. Martin, were there as well. So Mrs. Burton, I think I see you there in the middle with your shovel, getting down to business and planting some apple trees and pear trees, and I don't remember what other kind of trees, Mrs. Sprout, do you remember? Peach trees.
Yep.
Yes. And we had some, Mrs. Acosta and Mrs. Bradford were there as well, and Mrs. Jarvis was there, and it was just fantastic. The kiddos were so excited to get things going and unpackaged, and on the right is where you see our LCTC students working side by side with our students from Garfield Community School to do some of that build as well. So thank you to everybody. I think just a couple more. We want to congratulate Coach Phil. So Coach Phil, Greg Phil, who we've honored here before, has been named the National High School Swim Coach of the Year by the National High School Athletic Association, Coaches Association. A huge, huge honor for Coach Phil. We like to think that part of Coach Phil's success was having our own Allison Smith on the team years ago. But no, in all seriousness, we are so proud of Coach Phil and all the work he has done, all the years he has given to our student athletes at Stevenson High School. And we want you to mark your calendars, please, for the Competitive Edge sign-up. If you are a parent of a kindergarten student, please, you have until February 1st, but the sooner the better. You may use this QR code or go onto the foundation website. Please sign up your child. They will be enrolled in the Competitive Edge Savings Program, and then they will receive a scholarship when they graduate 13 years from now in LPS. We started giving away our first round of scholarships from the foundation in 2020 and continue to do so each year. And one of the things we regularly hear is, I didn't realize that, or I didn't know what that was when my child was a kindergartner. Can they sign up now? And maybe they're a 5th or 6th grader, and unfortunately, kindergarten is the only year, so that we know how many students are going into that cohort and can save appropriately. The cemetery walk, also benefiting the foundation and the Competitive Edge, will be held on Sunday, October 6th, from 1 to 5 p.m. At the Briggs Union Cemetery. So if you'd like to join, that's always a fun day. So that's at 6 Mile east of Haggerty, near the old Buca de Beppo. And finally, the Franklin, you remember last year, they started their Hall of Fame. Many of us were there at the inaugural induction. So they have a new set of inductees for this year, and that will be taking place on Friday, October 4th. So President Bradford, I appreciate you giving me extra time this evening and being able to talk about the buses and so on. And I will just close with sharing that this past week, we lost 3 LPS retirees. We had Christine Mitchell pass, who was a teacher of, a Spanish teacher at both Stevenson and Churchill from 2003 to 2014. She passed away this past week. Daniel Collins, who was a teacher here from 1967 to the year 2000. He spent his entire career teaching 4th through 6th grade at Hull Elementary, and his daughter, Bridget Wasserman, is a speech and language teacher here in the district. So we extend our sympathy to her and to their entire family after an amazing career here. And finally, Mrs. Rosemary Etu, who was a teacher with us from 1966 to 1998. She was an elementary teacher, a teacher of special needs students at the secondary and elementary level, finished her career at Emerson Middle School. She is the mom of our very own director of secondary programs, Kevin Etu, and her husband, Bob, previously deceased, also was a teacher and coach in Livonia Public Schools. So we want to share our deepest sympathy with each of those families who have lost someone very special to them, who were also very special to us.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist.
You're welcome. Thank you.
There are certainly a lot of things happening in the district, and we'll be continuing. Exciting. Great. I love the beginning of the year. It's always fresh and happy, and everybody's ready to go, so
There you
it's
go.
fun. All right, moving on to item 3D, written communications. I do not have any written communications. Does anybody have any? Okay, moving on to item 3E, a response to prior audience communications. I do not have any. Does anybody have any to share? Okay. We are going to move on to item F, 3F, audience communications. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to speak this evening? Seeing none, we can go ahead and move on to item 4, our consent agenda. And may I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda item as recommended by the superintendent. Item 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of August 19th, 2024.
Support. Support.
Very good. Okay. We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported excitedly by Mrs. Bonifield for our consent agenda this evening. Is there any member of the board that wishes to remove this said item from the consent agenda? All right. Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bonifield for the consent agenda. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion passes. We're going to move down to item 6, our business matters, and we're going on to item 6A, the approval of purchase of school buses. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mr. Johnson.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of Bluebird school buses from Holland Bus Company, Holland, Michigan, for a cost of $625,675.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of purchase of school buses. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Francis.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This is a planned out purchase from the 2021 bond that we have 6 minibuses. These minibuses will be replacing literally the oldest buses in our fleet, which is 10 years, which is excellent for us because we have been lately, ever since the 2013 bond, on a cycle where we're trying to keep our fleet up to date, have value from any machines that we would be replacing them with. So this is from the Holland Bus Company. We discussed this in a bit of detail at the Committee of the Whole, but essentially the Bluebirds are the vast majority of the district's fleet. Speaking with the Transportation Department, the supervisor in the garage, we came to the conclusion that even though these were not the lowest quoted item of the 3 quotes that we received from 3 different manufacturers, we believe that this is, in the long term, the wisest choice for Livonia Public Schools because it is the majority of our fleet. We stock parts for these vehicles. Our mechanics are very used to working on these vehicles, so we will be recommending to the board this purchase in the amount of $625,675. And again, just to clarify, the minibuses are, you can see that we listed them as 30-passenger minibuses, one of which of the 6 is 18-passenger because it has been modified to be what we call a wheelchair bus, so we can have a student with disabilities. The minibuses are used overall with students with disabilities that have IEPs, that have required transportation in those IEPs for a couple of reasons. One, that's a different type of bus service. It is generally what we would call door-to-door or curb-to-curb. We go right to the student's home. Sometimes we have to, if they live on a cul-de-sac, make a pretty difficult turnaround or go into a family's actual driveway to be able to turn around. So smaller buses are what we would use. a 77-passenger traditional size bus is not the vehicle you want. Additionally, we sometimes only have 1, 2, maybe 5 students that are on a route. We wouldn't want to, again, take a overly large using all that extra fuel. So just to kind of give some clarification on what is a minibus and what is a minibus used for. So we are excited about this purchase, replacing those 2014s. And I was actually speaking to both the supervisor of the transportation department and the garage supervisor, and both were very much looking forward to these coming into the fleet, and especially that wheelchair mini, because they know they're going to get some really good use out of it. So sorry for the long-winded, but buses are big purchases. They're investments, and the district makes in our staff and in our students. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background.
Thank you, Mr. Francis.
You're welcome.
Any questions or comments? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Bradford. Mr. Francis, I know that there's been a long lead time on buses. What's the lead time on these?
Well, they're calling these 26s. So they're going to be a long lead.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
2026.
2026.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear at that. I don't know what else 26s would mean, I'm sorry, in my head.
I thought
Oh, no, these are 2026s, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Mhm.
Yeah, that's typical.
A little
for-
year plus.
For
Mhm.
bus
Yeah,
purchases.
potentially, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Burton.
Just wanted to mention to those who may be listening, we don't have a lot of questions on this, and we probably won't on some of the other purchases, because we've discussed this at least a couple of meetings prior to this, and pretty much exhausted every question we could come up with. We try to mention that at these meetings so that it doesn't look like we're glossing over major purchases, but if you're looking for more information, you can go on our website and pull up the committee of the whole, or attend any of the study sessions, and we've got a lot of information on it there.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, just a quick, because we had the
Sure.
3 different quotes, I had a 26. They actually are calling this a model year 25. The chassis and the body is 25, but I would still say it's
They'll
going to
arrive
be, it's
in
going to be a year.
2026.
Yeah, that's what, we've had this ever since COVID, it's really a longer lead item, and we always usually figure about a year.
Great, thank you. All right, if there aren't any questions, we have a motion. Any more questions or comments? We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of purchase of school buses. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes, President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6B, the approval of purchase of tractors. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford?
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District authorize the purchase of 8 John Deere tractors and 8 front blades for plowing from Deere and Company, located in Cary, North Carolina, for a total cost of $71,611.76.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of purchase of tractors. And again, we'll hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank you very much. This purchase, again, another planned purchase out of the 2021 bond. We do have dollars from that bond initiative for maintenance equipment replacement of those items. So these we have that are a little more than a decade old. They're about 2013s that we want to replace. What we're looking to purchase in these tractors are mowers for the building specifically. I mentioned very briefly at the committee of the whole, and I will for anybody else that's watching at home now that didn't see that. We have our building supervisors and the folks who are assigned to specific buildings have some mowing obligations in their work duties, and then the large patches, the large areas of grass, our grounds crew that is district-wide work on those properties and mow those lawns. So this is replacing them at this location, central office, Buchanan, Coolidge, Hoover, Nigiero, and Roosevelt, and Frost, and the new Early Childhood Center. And We also have added, as you see, the blades, a plow. You can attach that to the front of this tractor, so in the winter also we'll get use out of these for our folks at the buildings, again, plowing the sidewalks around and walkways around their buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of purchase of tractors. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 7, instructional matters. We have item 7A, approval of purchase of Niji Iro Japanese curriculum. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Frank.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of Japanese curriculum materials from the Japanese Consulate for Niji Iro Elementary School for $29,362.39. This purchase includes Kokogo, Japanese, Sansu math, and music curriculum materials, assessments, and worksheets.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of purchase of Niji Iro Japanese curriculum. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien again.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
These materials, we purchase every 4 years. The Japanese Consulate updates their required curriculum that we utilize at Nijiro. And so each year I bring some consumable workbooks, but this year is a big group of curriculum resources. So Kokogo, Japanese materials, they're Sansu math, so they have their own Japanese math program that they utilize, their music curriculum, and then their own worksheets, teacher guides, assessment. So these curriculum resources are needed by Nijiro, and the funds for this purchase is the elementary textbook budget, which has been enhanced by the Wayne County Enhancement Millage.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Burton.
I haven't thought to ask this in the past, but, so this is their own curriculum. Do they also utilize part of the curriculum that we put in our regular Gen Ed LPS classrooms?
They utilize our English language arts curriculum, our OG, phonics and morphology. So students get Sansu math, so they don't utilize everyday math. So they get both.
Okay.
They do small group instruction, so they have a blend of both curriculums so that students have that immersion experience.
Okay, thank you. And we mentioned, or talked briefly in the Committee of the Whole meeting, a number of years ago, the Japanese Consulate paid for this curriculum, and then they stopped paying for it. Is that anything that we can request or dig into a little bit further for the next round of curriculum? Or was that just a one-time only and that door is definitely closed?
So I looked into that grant that had happened in the past, and at this time, it is not offered to cover these materials. So Mr. DeLuca and I will keep our eyes out and our ears open if those types of grants open up, that this curriculum resource would be paid for by the Japanese Consulate.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of purchase of Niji Iro Japanese curriculum. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 8, personnel matters, and item 8A, teachers for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Acosta.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 2024-25 school year to the teachers listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mr. Johnson, for teachers for approval, and this evening we're going to hear from Mr. Abate.
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening.
So the staff members we are presenting to the board this evening, they fill needs across a wide range of levels and programs in the district. It represents the remainder of our, or the kind of the tail end of our typical hiring initiative in the summertime to fill needs for the school year. They are very well qualified to fill their respective positions, and we are confident they will perform at a high level and represent LPS in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. These positions have also been included in the 2024-2025 budget. We're pleased to be recommending these talented professionals to join our LPS family, and with your approval, we're excited to have them working with our students.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. Any questions or comments from the board?
Congratulations.
Welcome.
Congratulations, welcome. Seeing none, except for the congratulations, we're going to go ahead and, Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll? Oh, first we have a motion from Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the teachers for approval. Now would you take the roll, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Congratulations again. All right, moving on to item 8B, teachers for tenure. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Bonnefield.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and acknowledge that tenure status has been granted to the following teachers effective on the respective date. Julianne Rohrhoff, September 26, 2024. Dawn Klein, September 26, 2024. And Chelsea Jarvasilis, September 30, 2024.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for teachers for tenure. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So our teachers for tenure on this agenda have successfully completed the district's requirements for probationary teachers, including years of service, evaluations of overall performance, and documentation of student growth. We have carefully reviewed all supporting materials along with the recommendations from administration and have verified they should be granted tenure status with Livonia Public Schools. We wish to offer our congratulations for reaching this milestone and look forward to many years of continued service with LPS.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats. Any questions or comments from members of the board?
Congratulations.
Congratulations. All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for teachers for tenure. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll?
Gladly. Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Our next item is 8C, resignations. That is for board information only. So we will go ahead and move on to item 9, hearing from board members. And we have item 9A, approval of voting delegates for the 2024 MASB Delegate Assembly. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve Karen Bradford, Mark Johnson, Madeline Acosta, and Liz Jarvis as voting delegates, and Colleen Burton and Crystal Frank as alternates for the MASB Delegate Assembly in Lansing, Michigan on October 24th, 2024.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of voting delegates for the 2024 MASB Delegate Assembly, and we're going to hear from Mrs. Oquist.
Thanks, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
We are pleased to have so many members of our board that will be attending this year's MASB conference in Lansing. On the first evening, there is a delegate assembly. That is an important time where MASB takes positions on a wide variety of issues related to the educational landscape. And so we appreciate the time you will spend representing Livonia Public Schools. So again, we have 4 delegates, which for our size district is what is allowable, 2 alternates. And at this time, there is no cost related to this, as we've already approved the cost related to the conference.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of voting delegates for the 2024 MASB Delegate Assembly. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. All right, moving on to item 9B, the approval of superintendent contract addendum for the evaluation process. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mr. Johnson.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the amendment to Superintendent Andrea L. Oquist's employment contract regarding the superintendent's evaluation annual cycle for the remainder of the contract, which currently expires June 30th, 2029.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of superintendent contract addendum per the evaluation process. I'm going to say a few words about that. This evening, this past legislative session, changes were made to the evaluation process for teachers, for administrators, and superintendents. Based on those changes, we have prepared an addendum for the superintendent's contract to address some of those items, including moving to a biennial evaluation cycle. We can move to this every other year cycle because Mrs. Oquist, Superintendent Oquist, has earned a highly effective rating for the past 9 years based on the thorough and rigorous MASB evaluation model and rubric that we utilize for this process. This addendum addresses the change in the cycle, and it also the required appeal process for an evaluation if that process were necessary. Just to note, there are no changes to any other portion of the contract, including the salary schedule or any other remuneration for services. Is a tough word for me. This legislation also required that our entire school board participate in updated training on the superintendent evaluation model, which we currently utilize, and it was established by MASB. We went through the training this past July here at our board office, and we completed this requirement before the September 1st timeline. So that's kind of the background on how we're doing the contract and making an addendum. Do we have any questions or comments from anybody? Okay. Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of superintendent contract addendum for the evaluation process. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 9C, the first reading of Board Policy Instructional Program, IDDE, Post-Secondary Credit Opportunities. This does not require a motion right now because as it's a first reading. And this evening, we are going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien on this.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
This board policy, IDDE, instructional program, post-secondary credit opportunities, was updated and reviewed in 2014, and we felt like there have been a lot of additions and things for us to think about in this board policy for post-secondary opportunities. So I'd like to read over the policy that we would like to adopt. For our first reading, the Board of Education supports opportunities for students to receive post-secondary credit while attending high school. The school district shall provide educational opportunities for students to earn post-secondary credit while attending high school. The school district is required to pay the lesser of A, the actual charge for tuition, mandatory course fees, material fees, and registration fees, or B, the state portion of the student's foundation allowance adjusted to the proportion of the school year they attended the post-secondary institution. Students who do not complete a dual enrollment course must repay the district.
Okay. Since this is a first reading, is there anybody that has any questions or comments regarding this reading? Mrs. Burton?
Actually, I do, and I really kind of should have maybe caught this earlier. The first two sentences are almost identical, and can we really combine them so
Yes.
that it reads something along the lines of, the Board of Education supports opportunities for, and will provide educational opportunities for students to receive post-secondary credit while attending high school?
Yep.
Or something along that line.
Yep.
Because they're nearly identical sentences, one after the other.
Supports and shall provide
Yes.
opportunities.
Yes.
Yep, that makes sense.
And that's great, because that's why we do the first readings of these, so that we can make some changes. And then what will happen is we will vote on it at the next regular meeting, and that will be read in its entirety then at the next board meeting. Mrs. Bonnefield?
Thank you, President Bradford. We had talked a little bit about whether or not passing or failing would require the repayment to the district of the fees. Does that need to be clarified more, or is that the assumption of the last sentence?
I think the last sentence is written with that assumption. Do you want it explicit?
I would think we would want it a little more explicit, just to make sure that they're in the understanding as if they do not pass that course, they would be expected to
Students
repay.
who do not pass or complete a dual enrollment course must repay the district?
Can we qualify what pass means? I don't know if there's a better way to say that you're passing a class.
Receives credit?
Well, I think the post-secondary institution determines what's passing grade.
Correct.
Okay.
But I think without that, just saying complete, if someone doesn't complete, they could have, dropped the course early, and that would be not completing, not necessarily not
Correct.
passing the course.
Mrs. Burton, thank you.
I suggest that we say must complete and pass the course.
Oh, okay.
President Bradford.
Yeah, sorry. Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. I have concerns with the same sentence. Students who do not complete a dual enrollment course must repay the district. We have hundreds of students who don't complete a dual enrollment course. Can we add in there a dual enrollment course in which they have been enrolled or for which they've been registered?
Students who enroll in a dual enrollment course and do not complete or pass that course must repay the district.
How does that sound? Yeah.
It's not written down, so I'll do the best I can.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
If they passed the course, they completed it.
That's true.
So
Oh,
you can't pass the class without completing, so I think passing covers
The completing.
completion.
So students who enroll in a dual enrollment course that do not, so students who enroll in a dual enrollment course must repay the district if they do not pass that course.
Mrs. Burton?
Can I just
Yeah.
suggest that
We
Flip
do
it.
this.
you take it back,
Yes.
take it back and massage it a little bit?
Yes.
And bring it back to the next board meeting?
Yes, let us rewrite that.
Yep.
I think I'd prefer to go the route of do not earn credit. So for
Yes.
whatever reason that is, whether it's passing, not completing it, dropping out, I just want to make sure that those are all synonymous
Yes.
with not earning credit. I'd prefer us to word it that way.
Perfect,
Since we're
yes.
generally an institution about learning.
Yes.
For some reason, the focus of not passing a course and having to repay, I understand what the law provides for, but I think it's really about earning credit, and it's making sure that if we're going to enroll a student and pay the significant amount that we pay for this, that they are attending class, completing class, working toward passage. That really is the goal. So I'd rather focus on earning credit.
That sounds good.
But let us take it back and we'll send it back to the board.
That sounds great. Everybody in agreement?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Okay, we'll move on to item 9D. The first reading of board policy students JGCD, student medications. And this evening, we are going to hear from Mr. Abate.
Yes, hello again.
Thank you.
So this particular policy is about the dispensing medication to students in our school buildings. It is a little lengthier. Would you like a full reading, or do you want me to cover the highlights? What would you prefer? What's proper in this situation?
Highlights should be sufficient, I believe.
Okay,
The changes, yeah, highlighting the changes that are made.
Sure. So the original policy simply states that medication may be administered to students with the proper permissions. What we've added to it is the definition of medication that we use in the district, which includes anything prescription, non-prescription, any sort of herbal medications, anything administered by mouth, inhaler, injection, drops, sprays, anything applied to the skin. So it's a full range of different products. We think it's important to note all of it. The remainder of the policy speaks specifically to our process for emergency EpiPens that we keep in the schools. Each school has 2 that are issued by the district for emergency situations. What we've added is some clarification of the responsibilities there of the administrators in the schools and our student services responsibilities as well in terms of supplying those EPIs to the schools and how and where they'll be supplied, et cetera. We also, the remainder there, we just made a couple of tweaks to titles, and that pretty much rounded it out. So you have a policy that covers how and when we may give medication to students, and the various procedures we will walk through if we have to use an emergency EpiPen for a student.
Okay, any questions or comments from the board on this one? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Bradford. Mr. Abate, I'm just thinking, this talks about replacing EpiPens that may have been expired. Should we perhaps have something in there about the disposition of expired EpiPens?
We certainly could. Oh, yeah, there may be. Yeah, we can check the procedure on that and I'll double check that. But
Okay.
if you'd like it front and center in the policy, that's not a problem either. It's an easy add.
It certainly wouldn't hurt, I don't think.
Any questions or comments? Mrs. Frank?
This might be in the procedures, but just a general, do any of our athletic teams have EpiPens, or are they only in the offices? Or do you know that, or not necessarily? Is that a Mr. E2 question?
Well, I believe that we have had our team, well, I can speak specifically to the middles. It's a better Mr. E2 question for the full secondary, but I know we have had or some of our teams take at least one of the EPIs along with them in their emergency kits.
Yeah.
I know we've done that certainly for our cross-country teams, because that often will run through that wooded area
Yeah.
and so forth, and we've had bees and that sort of thing, so they'll have those on hand with them. But in terms of the full district policy across secondary, I'm not certain if we've had them traveling with those or if they're back in the building. I believe we do have medical kits, though, that we take along.
Our
Mrs.
trainers do
Oakley.
have access to
Okay.
emergency response medication and goods on them as part of their role. If a trainer is not present, I can certainly double check as to what is provided to individual teams or coaches. Certainly, if a student has a plan, then absolutely we would have that. Whether or not there's an emergency one, if we are not aware of a student with a need for that, I'm not certain, but I do know our trainers do have emergency medical response. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions or comments regarding this first reading? And we're okay to put this on for a second reading at our next board meeting next month, and that's when we will vote on that. So if there aren't any other questions regarding that policy, JGCD, student medications, we can go ahead and move on. Mrs. Oquist.
I just want us to leave with clarity about whether or not you wanted the dispensing of medication. It talks about how to dispose of medication in the administrative procedures with regard to medication left at the end of the year. However, it doesn't in the policy. Am I clear that you would like that added to the policy?
Mrs. Burton?
I think if it's in the administrative procedures, that would be fine, because the procedures are basically the how you're going to carry it out. So it's sufficient for me if it's sufficient for the rest of the group.
Mr. Johnson?
I just noted, I took a look at the administrative procedures. It refers to the medications that's left over at the end of the school year or after the student has left the district shall be picked up by the parent or the guardian. But I don't see anything in there that the EpiPens that we are required to provide. I may be missing it, I'm just.
Yeah, it just under H, it says if this is not done, the individual who administers the medication will dispose of the medication and record this disposal on the medication log, and then we have a procedure within the district. But we can make that clearer. Why don't we make sure that that sentence includes, in addition to medication not picked up, any expired medication from the emergency
That'll work.
EpiPens? How about
And
we
let me
add something
clarify, that would only stay in the
on the
administrative
administrative
procedures.
procedures?
Okay,
That would
not
make
in the
sense to
policy.
me.
All
Yeah.
right, that's
Okay.
fine.
Is everybody
Mr.
in
Bonte, we're
agreement with
talking under
that?
Section H on page 70 there?
Okay, that works for me.
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
everybody good
Just
with
wanted to
that?
make sure we all left with the same understanding of where
Yeah.
we were headed with that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Quist. Okay. All righty, we are going to move on to item 9E, second reading of board policy, instructional program IDD, family engagement. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford? I'm sorry, is it somebody else?
Mrs. Burton? No, that's you.
Okay. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IDD, Family Engagement.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the second reading of board policy, instructional program IDD, family engagement. We're going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
This board policy IDD, family engagement, has been updated from 2014. And in essence, the changes that we discussed at the August 19th first reading were changing words from parent/guardian to family. So we changed the policy from a parent involvement policy to a family involvement policy. We changed the word participation or involvement to engagement, so that this policy now represents how we work with our parents and our families overall, so that it is about engaging our families to work with us through our schools.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? I do have a question. On the policy, it does say, it is recognized and appreciated that the family members are the quote, first teachers, unquote, of their children. Is there a reason we have that in quotations?
I think we typically call our families, our students' first teachers before they arrive at school, that we are their second group of teachers, but our parents and our families are students first. teachers.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I just wonder why we put that in quotations. Is that necessary to put it in quotations? I don't know.
Maybe because they're not certified teachers, but they're teachers.
Oh,
Makes sense.
okay. So leave that in there in quotes.
Yeah.
Okay? That was just a quick question. All right. Any other questions or comments regarding this policy? This is a second reading, so it does require a vote, so we will go ahead. We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the second reading board policy instructional program, IDD, family engagement. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, that motion carries. Moving on to item 9F, the second reading of board policy instructional program, IDDF, online learning. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Frank?
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IDDF, online learning.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the second reading board policy instructional program, IDDF, online learning. And we are going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien again. Thank you.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
Board policy IDDF was, our first reading was again on August 19th. There was just a small change to this policy when we looked at it, and we added the words access to online instructional programs for students. So the policy is a 2-sentence policy, and we just changed that students have, we shall provide them access to online instead of just provide online instructional programs.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the second reading board policy instructional program, IDDF, online learning. And Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 9G, hearing from board members. Hearing from board members is a time set aside if any board members would like to make any comments during the meeting. Is there anybody that wishes to speak this evening? Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you, President Bradford. Earlier today, our Superintendent Oquist mentioned the upcoming cemetery walk, which will be held on October 6th. It's at the Briggs Cemetery, which is a little tiny cemetery that you might not have even noticed. It's near the Trinity Theater and near Buco de Beppo on 6 Mile. I encourage those who are interested in attending this incredible event to go to the foundation's website at lpsfoundation.org and sign up. Pre-registration is strongly encouraged because there are time slots for tours, and you need to sign up for the tour that fits your schedule. So please take a few moments and sign up for it. This is a fundraiser for the foundation. We support children our second graders going to Greenmead and learning in the one-room schoolhouse, and this project directly supports that. But please do pre-register.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Any other comments? Mrs. Acosta?
Thank you. I just wanted to say Happy Hispanic Heritage Month. Feliz Feliz Mes de la Herencia Hispana for those that celebrate. And I see things that are happening across the district to celebrate that heritage. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. Any other comments this evening? Okay. Seeing none, I hope everybody continues to have a great year, and we are going to see you back in a few weeks here at the board table. So I wish everybody a good evening. Thank you for joining us. Good night.